Picture a porch light humming over a quiet Springfield street, a payphone glowing in an empty Clinton parking lot, a black SUV idling at a Missouri intersection, and then gone. 10 people, 10 Missouri towns. None of them came home. Lock the door, trace the map with me, and let's get into it. If you're new here, subscribe. New cases drop every week. June 6th, 1992, starts the way summer nights always start in Springfield, Missouri. Warm air carrying the last of the afternoon heat into the early evening. The distant noise of graduation parties finally winding down across a city where half the high schools seem to let out on the same weekend every year. And the whole town feels it, that particular loosening that happens when school is genuinely, finally over, and the summer stretches out ahead like something with no fixed end. It is the kind of night that feels, by every honest measure, exactly like what it is. Safe, familiar, unremarkable. The kind of night where people leave their doors unlocked and their porch lights on because nothing bad has ever happened on their street, and there is absolutely no reason, not a single one, to believe tonight will be any different from every night that came before it. Cheryl Levitt was 47 years old, a cosmetologist, a single mother who had spent years building a life in Springfield the way a lot of people build lives in mid-sized American cities, quietly, steadily, through the accumulation of ordinary days and ordinary choices, and the kind of deep neighborhood roots that mean your friends know which cup you use for your morning coffee and which side of the couch you prefer on a Sunday afternoon. Her daughter Suzanne, everyone who knew her called her Susie, was 19 years old and had just crossed the stage at her high school graduation. That diploma meant something real in the Levitt house. The celebration felt earned, the way celebrations feel earned when the people throwing them have genuinely worked for the moment. Susie's closest friend was Stacy McCall, 18 years old, and the two of them had spent that Friday evening doing exactly what graduating seniors do on the night. Everything officially begins, moving between parties across town, laughing in the back seats of cars, marking the invisible but permanent line between who you were in school and who you are about to become now that school is behind you. The plan for the night was the kind of plan that doesn't require a second thought because it is so simple it barely qualifies as a plan. Susie and Stacy would make their way back to Cheryl's home on Delmar Street after the parties wound down, sleep over the way they had done dozens of times before, and wake up in the morning with the whole summer waiting in front of them. Friends would drop them off. Cheryl would be home. The porch light would be on. End of plan. There was nothing complicated about it, and no reason to treat it as anything other than exactly what it appeared to be. Two teenagers coming home after a graduation night, to a house they both knew well, to a woman who was expecting them. By most accounts, they arrived back at the Delmar Street house sometime in the early hours of June 7th. Friends confirmed dropping them off at the curb. The street was quiet. The neighborhood was dark in the way residential neighborhoods are dark at that hour, punctuated by porch lights and the occasional slow sweep of headlights from a passing car, but otherwise still and settled and deeply ordinary. There was nothing to note, nothing that made the friends who dropped them off feel any hesitation as they pulled away. No reason for anyone who drove away that night to look back twice over their shoulder as they left. It was a normal drop-off at the end of a normal night, on a normal street, in a city where nothing like this had happened before. Here's the critical detail, and it is a small one, the kind of detail that reads as nothing until it suddenly reads as everything. At some point during that night, the glass globe covering the porch light fixture on the front of the house was broken. Not shattered in a wide spray across the porch boards, but broken the pieces found in a loose cluster near the base of the fixture, as though they had been knocked loose and had fallen or been swept to one side. A broken porch light globe does not explain itself. It does not tell you how it broke, whether someone struck it deliberately or whether it fell on its own, whether it happened before the women were inside or during something that unfolded after they arrived. It just sits there as a fact with no context attached to it, suspended in the record without an explanation. And in a missing persons case, a fact with no context is one of the most quietly unsettling things a detail can be. Because no one who could have explained it ever walked away from that house to tell anyone what happened. Not Cheryl, not Susie, not Stacy McCall. By the following morning, Friends who had been trying to reach the women without success began showing up at the front door. No answer. Someone eventually tested the door and found it unlocked. The lights were on inside. The house looked inhabited. There were dishes in the sink, an ashtray with cigarette butts, coffee cups that had clearly been used recently and then simply set down. Nothing looked ransacked. Nothing looked like the site of a struggle. The interior of the house looked, on first impression, exactly like a house where 3 people had stepped out to run a quick errand and would be back inside 20 minutes. The kind of house you could stand in the middle of and think, they just left. They'll be right back. There is nothing wrong here. Except both of Cheryl's cars were still sitting in the driveway. Every purse belonging to all 3 women was still inside the house. Not one personal belonging that any of them would have needed or wanted if they had chosen to go anywhere voluntarily had been touched, moved, or removed. 3 women had vanished from a quiet residential street in a Springfield neighborhood overnight, and everything they would have taken with them had they left on their own terms was still exactly where they had left it. This is where it stops being normal. What happened next damaged the investigation before the investigation had truly begun, and it happened for the most human and understandable of reasons. The friends who arrived that morning were not thinking about crime scenes. They were thinking about Cheryl Levitt, a woman they cared about, and they were moving through her house in the frame of mind of people who expected her back shortly and wanted everything to be right when she walked in. So while they were calling out names and checking rooms, they were also cleaning. They emptied ashtrays, they washed coffee cups, and set them in the drying rack. They straightened surfaces and tidied countertops with the automatic, affectionate instinct of people who know how someone keeps their home and want to honor that. It was love expressed as tidying, and it cost the case something it could never get back. 10 to 20 people are believed to have moved through that house before law enforcement could seal it and treat it as a potential crime scene. By the time investigators arrived to examine the interior with fresh and forensically trained eyes, whatever physical trace evidence might have existed to anchor a timeline, fibers, fingerprints, the specific arrangement of objects that tells a trained examiner what happened and roughly when had been washed away, walked over, or deposited directly into a garbage bag alongside the cigarette ash. It was an act of love that cost the case dearly and permanently, and not one person who participated in it can reasonably be blamed for what they couldn't have known they were doing. And then there was the answering machine. Cheryl had a machine with a physical tape, standard household hardware in 1992. Investigators wanted to review any messages that had come in during the night or the following morning because a voice, a name, a timestamp, a call that connected to anything or anyone could have helped reconstruct a timeline or identify a point of contact. The tape had been inadvertently erased, not by a suspect, by someone in that same window of confused, grieving, well-meaning foot traffic through the house who had pressed a button without understanding what they were clearing. What had been recorded on that tape before it was wiped is officially unknown. It may have been nothing at all, a telemarketer, a wrong number, dead air at 2 a.m. It may have been something that changed the entire shape of the case and everything investigators thought they understood about that night. No one will ever know. The tape is gone, and that particular question does not close. Now this is where the case turns dark in a very specific and lasting way, because most disappearances leave behind at least one of 2 things, a trail or a scene. A trail means someone saw a vehicle, a phone pinged a cell tower, a gas station attendant remembered a face. A scene means physical disruption, blood, a broken lock, furniture overturned in the geometry of a struggle. The Levitt house on Delmar Street offered neither, both cars untouched in the driveway. Every purse inside. No forced entry, no blood, no disorder. The only anomaly across the entire property was a small pile of glass from a porch light globe that may or may not mean a single thing, and that detail has never been resolved in either direction. 3 people vanished from a residential neighborhood in the middle of a night when other people were awake nearby and driving those same streets, and nobody reported hearing anything unusual. In 1997, a man named Robert Craig Cox, already serving a murder conviction in another state, told journalists that he knew the Springfield 3 were dead and buried. He made this claim in recorded interviews that received significant media attention at the time. He was subsequently confronted by investigators and declined to provide any specific, actionable information about the women's whereabouts. He has never been charged in connection with the case, and his statements have never been supported by physical evidence linking him to what happened on Delmar Street. That he made the claim is documented public record. That he knew anything of substance is entirely unconfirmed and remains so today. Theories have accumulated over more than 30 years. A single regional perpetrator, the broken globe as evidence of a forced or interrupted entry, the cleaned house as something other than well-meaning tidying. Every one of those theories is precisely that, a theory. None has produced an arrest. None has produced remains. None has closed the case. What is documented fact? Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall were last confirmed to be alive inside that house on Delmar Street in Springfield, Missouri, in the early hours of June 7th, 1992. Their cars were in the driveway. Their purses were inside. And that is the last confirmed moment anyone had verifiable evidence that all three of them existed in the world. A broken porch light, a cleaned house, a wiped tape. 3 women, 30 years. 0 answers. The next one is worse because he vanished in broad daylight, just steps from his own front door, during a completely ordinary afternoon chore. And the strangest detail in that case didn't surface until 2 full weeks after he was gone. Skidmore, Missouri, sits in the northwest corner of the state, in Nottoway County, where the landscape opens up into wide, flat agricultural stretches broken by grain elevators and gravel roads and the occasional water tower, marking a town small enough that everybody genuinely knows everybody and has for generations. It is the kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked, not because they are careless, but because they have never had a reason to be otherwise, where a young man doing yard work on a weekday afternoon is about as unremarkable a sight as a hawk circling over a cornfield. It is also, as anyone who has followed true crime for any length of time already knows, a town that has carried a disproportionate share of darkness for its size. But even against that complicated backdrop, what happened on the afternoon of April 11, 2001, stands apart, because Branson Perry did not disappear from a road or a parking lot or the far end of a trail. He disappeared from his own yard in the middle of the afternoon while doing a chore that should have taken him 3 minutes. Branson Perry was 21 years old. People who knew him described a young man who was physically capable in ways that went well beyond the average. He held a black belt in Hapkido, the Korean martial art, and was known as a serious weightlifter. He did not smoke. He was responsible in the way that responsibility looks when it comes from genuine character rather than obligation. He was cleaning and organizing his family's home specifically because his father had been hospitalized, and Branson wanted the house to be right when his father came back to it. That detail matters because it tells you something about where his head was that afternoon. He was not restless or distracted or on his way somewhere. He was anchored. He had a purpose and a place to be, and that place was his own yard on the 300 block of West Oak Street in Skidmore. And the purpose was to finish the work and have the house ready. There were other people present. That is the detail that separates this disappearance from a lonely rural highway or an empty parking lot in the middle of the night. 2 men were in the yard with Branson that afternoon, working on his father's car, a completely routine kind of neighborhood scene. A couple of people under a hood in a driveway, while someone else moves around the yard, getting other things done. Branson told the men he was going to put the jumper cables away in the shed. The shed was yards from where they were standing. He walked toward it, the cables in hand, and that was the last confirmed moment anyone saw Branson Perry alive. He did not come back out of the shed. He did not come back around the corner of the house. He did not appear at the door, or call out, or drive away in a vehicle, or walk down the street in a direction someone could later describe. The 2 men in the yard at some point registered that he was gone, and at some later point they left, and the house stood quiet, and the afternoon became the evening, and Branson Perry's absence accumulated without anyone attaching an alarm to it yet. Here's the critical detail, and it is a devastating one, in a case that already has more than its share of them. Branson Perry was not reported missing until 6 days after he disappeared. Not 6 hours. 6 days. April 17, 2001, is when the missing persons report was filed. Whatever those 6 days cost the investigation in terms of evidence, in terms of any physical trace that might have survived a few hours, but could not survive a week of Missouri spring weather and foot traffic, and simple time that cost cannot be recovered. The first 72 hours of a missing persons case are considered by investigators to be the most critical window. The window for Branson Perry closed entirely before it was ever opened. When law enforcement did begin to examine the scene, they found what Branson had left behind his van, all of his personal possessions, every item that a person who had chosen to walk away from their life would have taken with them if they had anywhere specific to go. He had not packed, he had not prepared. He had gone to put jumper cables in a shed, and everything else about his life remained in place, as though he had simply stepped away for a moment and would be back shortly. He was not back shortly. He was not back at all. And then 2 weeks after Branson Perry vanished from his yard in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, investigators returned to examine the shed again. The jumper cables were there, lying just outside the shed door, on the ground, in a position they had not been in when police first examined the area. Not inside the shed, where Branson had been heading to put them. Not in the yard where he had been carrying them. Just outside the threshold of the shed door, as though they had been set down by someone who was interrupted or placed there afterward, by someone who wanted to close a gap in the story without knowing quite how. Where the cables had been during those intervening 2 weeks is officially unknown. How they came to be in that position after a search had already confirmed they were not there is officially unknown. Whether their reappearance was the result of something that happened during the initial disappearance or something that happened later is officially unknown. But here's what doesn't make sense. A set of jumper cables does not move itself. It does not sit undiscovered for 2 weeks in a location that investigators had already visually confirmed was empty, and then simply appear. Something, or someone, put those cables outside that shed door after the initial search. And the identity of whoever did that, and why, and what it means for what happened to Branson Perry on the afternoon of April 11, 2001, has never been established. Skidmore's history adds a layer of context without adding any answers. The town had already spent years carrying the weight of events that drew national attention, the kind of history that tends to make outsiders wonder about the social fabric of a place, while residents quietly go on living in it. The way people live in all small towns, with the particular combination of closeness and privacy that comes from everyone knowing everyone and choosing carefully what they acknowledge out loud. Whether any of that broader context connects to what happened to Branson Perry is theory, not evidence. The documented fact is simpler and harder. A 21-year-old man with a black belt and a responsible afternoon ahead of him walked into a shed in his own yard in broad daylight, with 2 other people standing close enough to hear him speak, and was never seen again. No trace of him has ever been recovered. No one has ever been charged. The case is open. 2 jumper cables outside a shed door. A 6-day head start that no investigator can ever reclaim. A yard full of people who somehow saw nothing. The file on Branson Perry sits in Nottoway County, and it does not close. The next one left her car in the middle of a road in another state. And the 2-week gap in that case wasn't because no one reported her missing. It was because no one told her family where her car had been taken. Phoenix Colden was 23 years old when she disappeared on Sunday, December 18, 2011. She had grown up in a household where her parents described her as sheltered in the specific and intentional way that some families choose. She had been largely homeschooled. She moved in a world her family knew and participated in alongside her, and her daily life was routed through familiar people and familiar places. But she had layers. Her family was still in the process of discovering. She played multiple instruments. She had competed in fencing at a junior level and won. She was, in other words, a young woman with her own interior complexity, her own private landscape, which is the most ordinary thing about being 23 years old, and also the thing that made what came next harder to map. That Sunday began with church. After services, Phoenix left her family's home in Spanish Lake, a quiet, residential neighborhood in North St. Louis County, Missouri, in her black 1998 Chevrolet Blazer at approximately 3 in the afternoon. The drive from Spanish Lake to wherever she was heading should have taken a matter of minutes, depending on the destination. Her family believed, at that point, that she was enrolled at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. She had, without telling them, dropped her classes. Where she was actually going that afternoon is officially unknown. What is known is this. At approximately 5:27 in the afternoon, the black Blazer was found stopped in a lane of traffic on the 900 block of St. Clair Avenue in East St. Louis, Illinois, across the Mississippi River, in a different state, roughly 25 minutes from the house she had left 2.5 hours earlier. The car was not running. The door was not open. A detail frequently reported in early coverage, that the engine was running and a door was left open, is disputed and has been marked as inaccurate by investigators. The car was simply there, in a traffic lane, with Phoenix Colden not in it. Here's the critical detail, and it carries real weight. The car was impounded by East St. Louis authorities at approximately 6:23 that evening, less than an hour after it was spotted. Phoenix's family did not learn the car had been found and impounded until January 1st, 2012. 2 full weeks passed during which her family was searching for a young woman whose vehicle had already been located and secured by law enforcement on the other side of the state line, in an impound lot. While nobody made the connection and nobody made the call, the most important piece of physical evidence in Phoenix Colden's disappearance sat in an impound yard for 2 weeks while the trail went cold around it. This is where it stops being normal, because by the time investigators could ask the questions the car might have answered, the answers had aged past recovery. Why was Phoenix in East St. Louis? Who, if anyone, had she been in contact with that afternoon? The investigation revealed she had a phone and relationship leads that her family had not been aware of. Whether she drove herself to that spot voluntarily, or whether she was directed there, or whether something happened along the route that no camera or witness captured, remains officially unknown. Unconfirmed sightings placed her in the area afterward, but none were verified. The question of whether Phoenix Colden left that car on her own terms or was taken from it has never been answered. An SUV stopped in a lane of traffic in East St. Louis, Illinois, on a December Sunday in 2011. No driver, no explanation, no resolution. The next one was on the phone with the man she loved when it happened, and he heard everything. Clinton, Missouri, is a small city in Henry County, about 90 miles southeast of Kansas City. The kind of place where the downtown still has the bones of an older American Main Street brick storefronts, wide intersections. The particular quiet of a county seat after 9 o'clock at night, when the courthouse is dark and the parking lots are mostly empty, and the few businesses still lit are the ones that stay open late because somebody always needs something after hours. On the night of April 4th, 1991, one of those late-night fixtures was a payphone in a parking lot near the intersection of Jefferson Street and 2nd Street. A payphone in a parking lot is one of those details that dates a case instantly. It places you in a specific moment in American life, when checking in with someone you loved meant finding a booth, feeding quarters into a slot, and standing in the open air of wherever you happened to be while the call connected. It was ordinary. It was public. It felt safe in the way that being visible and audible on a public street at night feels safe. Because surely nothing can happen to you when you are standing under a light and talking loud enough for anyone nearby to hear your voice. Angela Hammond was 20 years old. She worked at a bank and was taking college classes, building the kind of life that gets built in increments. A job, a degree, a future that is taking shape slowly but clearly. She was 4 months pregnant. She was engaged to a man named Rob Schaefer, and by every account available in the public record, she was happy in the specific way that people are happy when the immediate future looks like exactly what they want it to look like. That night, she had driven out and stopped at the payphone to call Rob a routine check-in, the kind of call that has a comfortable rhythm to it, the kind where you can hear in someone's voice whether they are tired or distracted or just glad to be talking to you. Rob Schaefer picked up. Angela called. The conversation started the way those conversations always start, and for a few minutes, there was nothing unusual about any of it. Then it changed. Angela's tone shifted. She told Rob that there was a man nearby, a man who was watching her, whose attention felt wrong in the way that certain kinds of attention feel wrong before you can articulate precisely why. She described what she was seeing: a pickup truck, parked in a way that was paying too much attention to where she was standing. The man inside it fit a description that witnesses in the area would later corroborate: a white male, wearing coveralls and a dark cap, in a truck that had a rear window decal depicting an outdoor scene, the kind of hunting or fishing graphic that was common on trucks in rural Missouri in 1991. That description is as specific as the record gets, and it has never been attached to a name. Here's the critical detail: the call did not end. It broke. Rob Schaefer, on the other end of the line in that moment, heard Angela Hammond scream. Not a startled sound, a scream, the kind that carries information about what is happening even when no words are attached to it. And then the line went the way lines go when the person holding the receiver is no longer holding it: ambient sound, the dull weight of a dangling phone, and then whatever the night around that payphone had become without Angela in it. Rob Schaefer did not freeze. He got in his car and drove toward the payphone as fast as the roads between him and it allowed. He caught a glimpse of a truck matching the description Angela had given him, moving away from the area. He tried to follow it. And this is the part of Angela Hammond's case that becomes almost unbearable in its specificity. Because Rob Schaefer came so close to what might have been the only lead this case ever produced, and then his car broke down. Right there, in the middle of the chase, his vehicle failed him. The truck moved out of his reach and into the rural Missouri darkness, beyond Clinton's streetlights, and that was the end of the pursuit, the end of the trail. And for Angela Hammond, it appears to have been the end of everything that could have changed the outcome. This is where it stops being normal, in a way that compounds with every additional fact. Clinton is not a large city. The roads leading out of it, into the surrounding countryside, are the kind of roads where a truck with a distinctive rear window decal should have been identifiable, where somebody should have seen it at a gas station, or passed it on a county road, or recognized it in a neighbor's driveway. The truck was never found. The man in the coveralls and the dark cap was never identified. The payphone was examined. The parking lot was examined. Rob Schaefer was polygraphed and considered a suspect for a period of time before being cleared. The investigation moved in every available direction and found, at each turn, the same thing: a truck-shaped hole in the record where an answer should have been. Now this is where the case turns dark in a regional sense, because Angela Hammond did not disappear into a completely empty landscape. Two other women had vanished from the same general corridor of western Missouri in the months immediately before her. Trudy Darby disappeared from Max Creek on January 19, 1991, less than 3 months before Angela. Cheryl Ann Kenny disappeared from Nevada, Missouri, on February 27, 1991, 5 weeks before Angela. 3 women, within a roughly 90-mile radius, within a 3-month window. Whether those cases are connected by a single perpetrator or by the terrible coincidence that makes clusters appear where they may not exist is a theory, not an established fact. Investigators have examined the possibility. No one has ever produced evidence that formally links them. But here's what doesn't make sense about treating them as pure coincidence: the geography, the timing, the rural highway access, and the specific vulnerability of isolated women at roadside locations in that corridor add up to a pattern that investigators could not responsibly ignore, even while they could not responsibly confirm it. The cases remain separate in the official record. Whether they belong together is a question that has never been answered. In 2021, 3 decades after Angela Hammond vanished from that parking lot, a new piece of information surfaced, the kind of development that cold cases occasionally produce when someone who has been carrying knowledge finally decides to speak. An informant came forward with a theory that Angela may have been the victim of a case of mistaken identity, that the man in the truck had been looking for a different Angela, a different young woman who also went by Angie and also lived in Clinton at the time, and that Angela Hammond had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong moment when someone who meant harm to another person found her first. This theory has not been confirmed. The informant's account has not produced an arrest, a charge, or a named suspect. It is documented as a lead investigators pursued, and its current status is unresolved. What is documented fact? At 11:45 at night on April 4, 1991, Angela Hammond was standing at a payphone in Clinton, Missouri, talking to the man she was going to marry, 4 months pregnant with their child. A truck pulled up. She screamed. Rob Schaefer heard it through the receiver. His car broke down in the dark, and the truck drove away into a rural Missouri night that has never given Angela back. A dangling payphone receiver in an empty parking lot. A truck nobody could catch. A lead that arrived 30 years too late to tell us whether it means anything at all. If you're finding these cases as haunting as they deserve to be, hit subscribe. There are more case files just like this one waiting for you. The next one happened inside a family home in Kansas City, while everyone else in the house was asleep and the missing person was 10 months old. Lisa Irwin was reported missing on October 3, 2011, from her family's home in Kansas City, Missouri. She was an infant 10 months old, at the stage of life where a child's entire world is the four walls of the house they sleep in and the faces of the people who care for them. She had been put to bed for the night by her family, and at some point between when she was last seen in her crib and when the alarm was raised, she was gone. The case drew immediate and massive national attention in part because of the age of the missing child, in part because of the scale of the search that followed, and in part because of the questions that accumulated around the timeline of that night. A large-scale search was launched. The FBI became involved. Kansas City mobilized in the way that communities mobilize when a child is the one who has gone missing, with the particular urgency that attaches itself to the most vulnerable possible victim. Here's the critical detail. The specific sequence of events inside the home that night, who last checked on Lisa, at what time, in what order, contained elements that investigators examined carefully and that produced conflicting accounts in the early days of the case. Those specifics are documented in contemporaneous reporting and in law enforcement statements from the period, but they require careful treatment because certain details remain disputed in the public record, and certain items that were reported early on were later revised or walked back. The power to the home was reported to have been out that night. A window in the home was noted in early coverage. Beyond those basic reported facts, the precise interior timeline of that night is marked in this account, as it should be marked in any honest treatment of it, partially unknown, partially disputed, and not to be stated with a certainty the record does not support. What is not disputed: an infant girl went missing from inside a home in Kansas City on the night of October 3rd into the early hours of October 4th, 2011. No intruder was ever identified. No confirmed sighting of Lisa Irwin was ever produced. No arrest was ever made. The FBI investigation continued for an extended period after the initial search and produced no public charges against any individual. Lisa Irwin would be 13 years old today. Her case is open. Her whereabouts are officially unknown. The empty crib in the early light of an October morning in Kansas City, Missouri, is where this case begins, and for now, and for more than a decade, where it stays. No confirmed sighting, no arrest, no answer. The next one walked out of a gas station for an ordinary shift in the Missouri Booth Heel and vanished from a place where people are supposed to be coming and going all day long. Scott City sits in Scott County, in the southeastern corner of Missouri that locals and geographers alike call the Booth Heel, the narrow rectangular extension of the state that drops down between Kentucky, Tennessee, and Arkansas like a geographic afterthought, flat and agricultural, and cut through by the wide corridor of Interstate 55 running north toward St. Louis and south toward Memphis. It is delta country in texture, if not in name, the kind of terrain where the horizon is genuinely unobstructed for miles in every direction, where the roads run straight because there is nothing to route them around, and where the highway is both the main artery of commerce and the main avenue of anonymity for anyone who wants to move through a place without being remembered. A gas station or convenience stop on that corridor is not a hidden location. It is a public one, exposed to the road, visible to passing traffic. The kind of place where ordinary transactions happen dozens of times a day between strangers who pay and leave and never think twice about the person who handed them their change. That visibility is supposed to be a form of protection. For Cheryl Scherer, on April 17, 1979, it was not. Cheryl Scherer was 19 years old. She was working a shift, the kind of work that 19-year-olds do in small Missouri towns. The steady, unremarkable labor of keeping a roadside business running, handling the register, watching the pumps, managing the rhythm of customers coming in and going out. It is work that puts you in a specific kind of exposure. You are known to be there, at a known location, at a known time, and the nature of the job means you cannot simply step away or move to a less visible position. You are where the road expects you to be, and the road sends whoever it sends. At some point on April 17, 1979, Cheryl Scherer vanished from that workplace in Scott City. The specific circumstances of how her absence was first noticed, whether a customer found the station unattended, whether a coworker arrived to find her gone, whether the state of the station itself told a story about what had happened, are not fully detailed in the available public record, and this account will not construct specifics that the record does not support. What the Scott County Sheriff's Office documented is the essential fact. Cheryl Scherer was there, and then she was not. And nothing in the 40-plus years since has produced a confirmed answer about what happened to her between those two states. Here's the critical detail about the geography of this case. Interstate 55, which runs directly through this part of the Booth Heel, connects Scott City northward to St. Louis and southward through the Delta states in both directions. A highway of that reach, in 1979, before the surveillance infrastructure that now makes roadside crimes harder to sustain invisibly, was a corridor that investigators working cold cases from this era have repeatedly identified as a vector for predatory crimes against isolated individuals at roadside locations. That observation is a theory applied to the geography, not a fact established by evidence in Cheryl Scherer's specific case. It is the kind of theory that investigators consider because the landscape demands it, not because anyone has proven it. But here's what doesn't make sense about a disappearance from a public roadside business. The exposure that is supposed to make such a place safe is the same exposure that makes it accessible. Anyone on that highway could stop. Anyone who stopped could observe the layout, the staffing, the rhythms of the place. A single person working a shift at a roadside station in 1979 before cell phones, before surveillance cameras at every pump, before the baseline assumption of constant documentation that now accompanies public spaces was visible and vulnerable in equal measure. Cheryl Scherer was both. The investigation that followed her disappearance has not produced a public suspect, a confirmed sighting, or a resolution of any kind in more than 4 decades. What the Scott County Sheriff's Office maintains is an open case, with the documented facts reduced to their irreducible core. A 19-year-old woman last seen at her workplace on a spring day in 1979, in a town on a major interstate corridor, who has not been found. Her case sits in the cold case record not because it lacks gravity, but because it lacks the thread of evidence that would pull it toward an answer. The years have not been kind to it in the way that years are never kind to cases that begin with thin, early evidence and compound that thinness with the simple erosion of time. An empty counter, a quiet pump island, the steady sound of highway traffic that never stopped and never produced a witness who could say what they saw. Cheryl Scherer's case is 45 years old, and it is still open, and the Booth Heel landscape that surrounded her workplace has not changed enough to close the distance between what is known and what happened. Now this is where the geography shifts entirely, because the next case moves northeast along that same interstate corridor, and then bends east toward the Missouri-Illinois border and the flat river bottoms of St. Charles County, a landscape that is neither city, countryside, but the ambiguous terrain between them, where field roads end at drainage ditches and the distance between a body and the nearest occupied building can be measured in a silence that carries for miles. West Alton, Missouri, sits at the confluence of the Missouri and Mississippi rivers, a place defined by water and the flat, worked land around it. On June 30th, 1999, a man named Ricky McCormick was found dead in a field near West Alton. He was 41 years old. The manner of his death was ruled a homicide, and by the normal logic of homicide investigations, that should have been the beginning of the case moving toward resolution. It was not. It was the beginning of one of the most genuinely strange cold cases in American investigative history, not because of what was found at the scene, but because of what was found in Ricky McCormick's pockets. Frame this case correctly from the start, because it is easy to let the most dramatic detail swallow the human being at its center. Ricky McCormick was a man. He had a life, a family, a history that predated the afternoon his body was found in that St. Charles County field. He was from St. Louis. He had health problems that required regular medical attention. He was not supposed to be in West Alton, he did not drive, and the field where his body was found was miles from his home and from any location that his known routine would have taken him. How he reached that field, by what means and in whose company, is a question the investigation has never answered. There was no car. There was no confirmed sighting of him arriving at that location. He was simply there, in the way that a body in a field is simply there when the field is discovered and examined, the presence established, the route to it invisible. The investigation into Ricky McCormick's death proceeded along the lines that homicide investigations proceed. The scene was examined, his background was reviewed, potential connections to anyone with a motive were explored. None of it produced an arrest. The case went cold in the way that underfunded investigations of victims with limited public profiles sometimes go cold, not with a dramatic failure, but with a slow accumulation of dead ends that eventually produces a file that sits in a drawer and does not move. And then, in 2011, the FBI did something unusual. 12 years after Ricky McCormick was found dead in that West Alton field, the FBI's Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit, the branch of the Bureau specifically tasked with breaking codes and ciphers, publicly released 2 handwritten notes that had been found in McCormick's pockets at the time his body was discovered. The notes had been held in evidence for over a decade. Investigators had examined them and been unable to determine what they said. Now the FBI was asking the public for help because their own codebreakers had looked at those 2 scraps of paper and could not crack them. Here's the critical detail. The notes were not in any recognizable language or cipher system that the FBI's unit, a unit that exists specifically to break exactly this kind of thing, could identify or decode. They contained a mixture of letters, numbers, and symbols arranged in patterns that looked organized, that looked like they meant something, but that have resisted every systematic analytical approach applied to them in the quarter century since they were found. The FBI stated publicly in 2011 that McCormick had been writing in this personal system for years, suggesting the notes were not random marks, but a genuine encoding of information that only McCormick, and potentially whoever communicated with him through this system, could read. What do the notes say? Officially unknown. What were they for? Officially unknown. Whether they are a record of something criminal, a personal journal in an invented shorthand, a message intended for a specific recipient, or something else entirely unknown. The FBI's public appeal for help from amateur cryptographers and puzzle solvers generated significant attention and a substantial volume of proposed solutions, none of which has been confirmed as correct. The notes remain unread in any verified sense, sitting in the case file as perhaps the most concrete piece of evidence in a homicide, and simultaneously the most completely opaque. Now this is where the case turns dark in a very specific direction. Because the impossibility of reading those notes is not just an intellectual puzzle, it is a practical obstacle to understanding what Ricky McCormick's life contained that led to his death. If the notes record something he witnessed, or something he was involved in, or a name or a location that connects to whoever left him in that field, then the answer to his murder may already exist in documentary form, written in his own hand, carried in his own pockets, and it is entirely unreadable. But here's what doesn't make sense on the most basic level. How did Ricky McCormick reach West Alton? He did not drive. The field where he was found was not on a bus route. Nobody came forward to say they dropped him there, or saw him walking the field roads, or encountered him anywhere in St. Charles County in the days before June 30th, 1999. The geographical impossibility of his presence in that location has never been resolved, any more than the linguistic impossibility of his notes has been resolved. 2 mysteries layered on top of each other in a case that began with the most straightforward of facts: a man found dead in a field and became steadily, irreducibly stranger the more closely anyone looked at it. 2 scraps of paper in a dead man's pocket, a field in St. Charles County that he had no documented way of reaching, a cipher that the FBI cannot read. Ricky McCormick's case is 25 years old, and the notes are still classified as among the most famous uncracked codes in American law enforcement history, and the man who wrote them has still not received anything that resembles justice. The next one left for a gas station 2 miles from her apartment on a November night in 1978, and a witness on a dark highway saw exactly what happened, and still nobody was ever caught. Jefferson City, Missouri, is the state capital, a mid-sized city on the south bank of the Missouri River in the geographic center of the state, where the government buildings cluster on a bluff above the water, and the residential neighborhoods spread out behind them into a landscape of older streets and corner businesses, and the particular rhythm of a city that runs on state government hours and goes quiet after dark in the way that administrative cities often do. In November of 1978, it was a city where a woman living alone in an apartment could make a late-night errand run to a nearby gas station without it being an unusual choice, because the station was close and the roads were familiar, and it was the kind of thing people do without thinking twice because they have done it 100 times before and nothing has ever happened. Leanne Wilson was 36 years old. She left her Jefferson City apartment at approximately 10 o'clock in the evening on November 2nd, 1978, to drive to a gas station that was, by the geography of the city, a short and uncomplicated trip. The station was nearby. The route was known. She had every reason to expect she would be back inside 20 minutes. She was seen at the gas station. That detail is documented a witness or record placing her there, in her vehicle, alone. At some point after she left her apartment, she made the stop she had set out to make. And then she turned toward home, and somewhere between the gas station and her front door, everything that was supposed to be ordinary about that night became something else entirely. Here's the critical detail, and it comes from a witness account that is one of the only documented pieces of human observation in this case. At approximately 11:30 in the evening, roughly an hour and a half after Leanne Wilson left her apartment, a witness reported seeing a gray vehicle from the 1970s stopped on the median of United States Highway 63, south of the intersection with Highway 163. The vehicle's hazard lights were flashing, and alongside that vehicle, on the median of a state highway in the dark of a November night, the witness reported seeing a man striking a woman. The witness reported what they saw, and then the witness drove on, or was unable to intervene, or did what people sometimes do when they see something alarming at highway speed in the dark, registered it, processed it too slowly, and found themselves past it before they fully understood what they had witnessed. That account is the closest thing this case has to a moment of visible crisis. The specific instant when Leanne Wilson's ordinary errand transformed into something that cannot be walked back. It is also, frustratingly, exactly the kind of witness account that generates more questions than it answers. A gray vehicle, a man, a woman, hazard lights blinking on a dark median. The witness could not provide a plate number, could not provide a detailed description of the man, could not stop the clock on what was happening in the time it took to process what they were looking at and react. What the witness saw was real enough to be documented and taken seriously by investigators. It was not enough to identify anyone. Leanne Wilson's body was found the following morning in the area near Ashland, Missouri, a small community roughly 12 miles south of Jefferson City, along the United States 63 corridor. Ashland sits in Boone County, which places the discovery just across the county line from where she had started the night. Her death was ruled a homicide. The investigation that followed was conducted by Missouri law enforcement and has remained open, unresolved, across more than 4 decades. But here's what doesn't make sense, or rather, here is the detail that makes the geography of this case more complicated than a simple roadside attack and leaves the investigation with a question it has never been able to answer. Leanne Wilson's vehicle was found not near her body, not on the United States 63 median where a witness had seen a gray car with its hazard lights running, and not abandoned at any point along the corridor between Jefferson City and Ashland. It was found in a grocery store parking lot in Jefferson City. Someone had driven that car away from wherever Leanne Wilson's night ended, navigated it back north toward the city she had started from, left it in a parking lot, and walked away from it. That is not the behavior of someone who attacked a woman impulsively on the side of a road and fled. That is the behavior of someone who had the presence of mind, after whatever they did on that median, to manage a vehicle, control a route, choose a disposal location, and disappear into a city without being seen doing any of it. This is where it stops being normal in the way that logistical control stops being normal, because impulsive violence and careful vehicle management do not sit easily together. And the person who left that car in a Jefferson City grocery store lot understood enough about what they were doing to make choices that complicated the investigation before the investigation had fully begun. Who moved the car? Why to that specific lot? How did they leave the lot after abandoning the vehicle on foot, in another car, with someone waiting? None of those questions have been answered in the documented public record. The United States 63 corridor between Jefferson City and Ashland is the kind of road that feels different at night than it does in daylight. A state highway that carries regular traffic through a landscape of rolling hills and tree lines and the occasional farmstead set back from the road, familiar enough in daylight and genuinely isolated in the specific way that rural Missouri is isolated. After 10 o'clock on a November night in 1978, when the darkness is complete and the distance between occupied buildings is measured in minutes rather than steps, Leanne Wilson was on that road because it was the road between her apartment and the station she needed to stop at, and the route should have been unremarkable, and instead, it became the last road she traveled. The man the witness saw on that median has never been identified. The case is unsolved. Hazard lights blinking in the dark on a Missouri highway. A car left in a parking lot miles away. A witness account that saw the moment and couldn't stop it. Leanne Wilson's case is 46 years old, and it remains open in Boone County. And the gray vehicle from the 1970s is still a description without an owner. Now this is where the geography shifts again, because the next case moves us into the northwest of the state into Kansas City, a major metropolitan area, the largest city in Missouri, where the scale of the urban environment is supposed to mean more eyes, more infrastructure, more of the documentation that makes people findable when they go missing. Kansas City is not a rural field road or a Booth Heel highway. It is a city with neighborhoods and streetlights, and neighbors close enough to hear a sound through a shared wall. And yet, on the night of October 3rd into the early hours of October 4th, 2011, something happened inside a Kansas City home that the city's scale and density and infrastructure could not prevent, and has not, in the years since, been able to explain. Lisa Irwin was 10 months old. She had been put to bed in her crib in her family's home in Kansas City. The members of her family were in the house that night. And sometime between when she was last seen in that crib and when the alarm was raised in the morning, she was gone, not wandered off, not crawled out of reach, but gone from the house in a way that a 10-month-old child cannot accomplish independently, and that someone, therefore, must have accomplished for her. The case entered the national news cycle with the speed that cases involving young children always do, because there is a specific and universal alarm that attaches to the disappearance of an infant that bypasses all the filters people normally apply to other people's troubles and lands directly in the place where everyone who has ever known a child keeps their most fundamental fears. The search was large. The FBI was involved. Kansas City law enforcement committed substantial resources to finding Lisa Irwin in the immediate aftermath of the report and in the weeks and months that followed. Here's the critical detail, and it requires careful handling because the early days of this case were marked by a volume of reporting that was not always consistent or fully verified. The power to the home was reported to have been out during the relevant period that night. A window in the home was referenced in early coverage as potentially significant to how someone might have entered or exited. These are details from contemporaneous news reporting and early law enforcement statements. And they carry the caveat that early reporting in high-profile disappearance cases is frequently revised as investigations develop and more precise information replaces initial accounts. What this account will not do is treat disputed or partially verified early details as established fact, because doing so would misrepresent the actual state of the public record. What is not disputed, what sits in the documented public record without serious challenge. Lisa Irwin was a 10-month-old girl who was last seen in her crib in her Kansas City home on the night of October 3rd, 2011. She was reported missing the following morning. No intruder was ever charged. No confirmed sighting was ever produced. No arrest was ever made in connection with her disappearance. The investigation, which included FBI involvement and one of the larger searches in recent Kansas City history, did not produce a resolution. Lisa Irwin would be 13 years old today. But here's what doesn't make sense in the most elemental way possible. An infant cannot remove herself from a crib and leave a house. Whatever happened to Lisa Irwin required another person. That person has never been identified in any public charging document. The case is open. The crib is the beginning and, for the purposes of what the public record can tell us, the end, an empty space in a Kansas City home where a child should have been sleeping and wasn't. And the years since have not filled that space with anything that resembles an answer. An empty crib at dawn. A citywide search that found nothing. More than a decade of open questions, in a case where the most basic fact, where Lisa Irwin is, remains officially unknown. The next one walked out of a workplace in southeast Missouri in 1979, and the highway took her, and the next after that was found in a field with coded notes in his pockets that the FBI still cannot read. There is a particular quality to the silence that follows a case like Lisa Irwin's, the silence of a disappearance that happened inside a home, behind walls, in the dark, where the absence of evidence is itself the most disturbing evidence of all. But not every Missouri disappearance happens in the dark or in a hidden place or at an hour when the streets are empty and the witnesses are asleep. Some of them happen in the middle of the day, in public, in places specifically designed to gather people together in a supervised and structured environment. Some of them happen at a pool on a July afternoon with dozens of people present in full summer daylight, and the crowd around the missing person is no protection at all, because the crowd never quite sees the moment it should have seen. St. Joseph, Missouri, sits on the west side of the state in Buchanan County, on the Missouri River across from Kansas City's northern reach, a mid-sized city with the particular character of a place that was once a major American waypoint, the eastern terminus of the Pony Express, a city that watched the frontier move west through it, and then settled into the quieter work of being a regional center for the surrounding agricultural landscape. It has neighborhoods with the deep-rooted quality of places where families stay for generations, where a school vice principal knows her students well enough to recognize them on a street corner months after they've gone missing, where a public park pool on a summer afternoon draws the kind of crowd that feels, to a parent dropping off two kids at the gate, like its own form of safety. Tammy Mack was that parent on the afternoon of July 6, 2004. She pulled up to Krug Pool, located at 3541 St. Joseph Avenue, inside Krug Park, at noon. And she put her 15-year-old daughter Ashley in charge of her younger brother, told them she would be back at the end of the day, and watched Ashley walk through the pool's gated entrance. That was the last time Tammy Mack saw her daughter. Ashley Renee Martinez was born on January 24, 1989, which made her 15 years old that July. She was an 8th grader at Robidoux School. She was 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed approximately 110 pounds, with sandy blonde hair and blue eyes, and she carried herself with the particular combination of teenage self-possession and underlying vulnerability that 15-year-olds carry when they are old enough to make consequential decisions and young enough to make them badly. She was wearing blue jean shorts, a black top, and a black bikini with a red cherry print underneath her clothing, with white Reebok sneakers with red accents and a ring with 2 hearts joined together on her finger. She had piercings in her tongue, her navel, and her ears, and a scar on her left wrist. She had 3 cats at home. She had a brother named Abel Martinez, the 4th, older, and the younger brother she had been left in charge of that afternoon. She had medication she took regularly, which she left behind when she disappeared. You do not leave behind medication you depend on if you are planning carefully for where you are going next. For the first few hours of that afternoon, there was nothing to note. Ashley was at the pool. The pool was crowded the way public pools are crowded on a July afternoon in Missouri, kids moving in and out of the water, towels spread on the concrete, the particular noise of a summer public space that exists specifically to gather people in one place and let them exist in easy proximity to each other. Ashley was part of that crowd. She was seen by multiple people who were there that day. Here's the critical detail. At some point during those hours, Ashley borrowed a cell phone from a friend and made a call. The call connected her to someone. The content of that call, who she reached, what was said, what was arranged, is not fully documented in the public record in a way that allows it to be quoted with precision, but what happened immediately after the call is documented by multiple witnesses. Ashley left the pool. She walked out of that public space, in that crowd, on that July afternoon, and she got into a vehicle. The vehicle was a gray 1995 Pontiac Bonneville with Missouri license plates, 377 MPY. The man at the wheel was not a peer, not another teenager, not someone whose presence alongside a 15-year-old girl at a public pool would read as ordinary. He was an adult, significantly older, and witnesses who saw Ashley get into that car described the scene without ambiguity. This is where it stops being normal. Because the man behind the wheel of that gray Bonneville has a name and a record that make his presence alongside a 15-year-old girl in a stolen car at a public pool in broad daylight. One of the most alarming facts in this entire case. Christopher Matthias Hart was 32 years old. He had a criminal record that included a conviction for second-degree assault, as well as charges of drug possession, unlawful use of a weapon, and resisting arrest. He was on parole at the time he appeared in that parking lot in St. Joseph on July 6, 2004. The Pontiac Bonneville he was driving was stolen. He lived in the vicinity of Ashley's home, which means he was not a stranger in the way that a predator from outside a community is a stranger. He was a known presence in her geographic world, someone whose path had crossed hers before that afternoon. When Tammy Mack returned to Krug Pool at the end of the day, her son was waiting at the gate. Ashley was not. The missing persons report went to the St. Joseph Police Department. Friends and witnesses from the pool were questioned, and in those first conversations, investigators encountered a detail that complicated every subsequent decision about how to classify Ashley's case and how urgently to pursue it. Ashley's friends told police that Ashley had talked about running away. That information, combined with the voluntary nature of Ashley getting into Hart's car as witnessed by multiple people at the pool, pushed the official classification of her case toward endangered runaway rather than abduction. That classification has shaped the case ever since, and it has never been resolved by any development that clearly supersedes it in either direction. Now this is where the case turns dark in the way that cases turn dark when institutional decisions and ground-level reality start to pull in opposite directions. 11 days after Ashley vanished from that pool, Christopher Matthias Hart was arrested in Washington State, across the country, which confirms that he had indeed left Missouri and traveled a significant distance with whatever he was carrying, whoever he was carrying. Police in Washington did not immediately realize he was wanted in connection with a missing girl in Missouri. They processed him on the unrelated charges that had brought him to their attention and released him. Hart walked out of custody. He was arrested again on September 7th, still in Washington, after his identity was confirmed and the Missouri connection was established. He was brought back into the system. And from that point forward, Christopher Matthias Hart has not provided investigators with a single piece of actionable information about Ashley Martinez. Not one word. In the years since his arrest, through every investigative contact that has been documented publicly, Hart has maintained a silence about Ashley that is itself a kind of answer, even if it is not the kind that closes a case. But here's what doesn't make sense about the runaway classification. The thing that sits uneasily alongside it no matter how long you look at it. Ashley Martinez ran away from home once before, in 2001, 3 years before she disappeared from that pool. She did not leave the state. She was gone for approximately 1 day before she came home voluntarily. The prior incident is the kind of thing that gives a runaway classification a foothold in a case it establishes precedent. It makes the theory of voluntary departure feel less like a reach. But the prior incident also establishes a baseline for what Ashley's running away looked like, and what it looked like was local, brief, and self-resolving. What happened after July 6, 2004, looks nothing like that. Hart traveled out of state. The stolen Bonneville was never recovered. Ashley has never come home voluntarily or otherwise, has never made contact with her family, has never appeared in any verified and confirmed sighting in 2 decades of searching. There is one reported sighting that carries particular weight because of who reported it. In September of 2004, 3 months after Ashley disappeared from Krug Pool, a woman reported seeing a girl she believed was Ashley on the northeast corner of Frederick Street and Leonard Road in St. Joseph. The woman who reported the sighting was the vice principal at Ashley's school. She knew Ashley. She had seen her regularly in an institutional context where you learn a person's face and their way of moving and the particular combination of features that makes one student distinct from another. She said she recognized the jeans and t-shirt Ashley was wearing as clothing Ashley had worn to school before. That sighting has not been verified. It sits in the record as a reported observation by a credible witness who knew the subject, and it has not been confirmed by any other evidence or follow-up documentation that is available in the public record. The current investigator assigned to Ashley's case, Sergeant Jason Strong, has identified Christopher Matthias Hart as a person of interest. That designation is documented in reporting, including coverage by Dateline. No charges have been filed in Ashley Martinez's disappearance. Hart has not been charged with anything related to her case. His silence has been total and sustained, and, in its own way, the most significant thing he has communicated to investigators across 2 decades of inquiry. Here's the impossible gap that sits at the center of this case like a weight that doesn't shift. A crowded public pool on a July afternoon, full of people who were watching, people who saw Ashley make a phone call and walk out to a car and get in voluntarily, and in all of that visibility, in all of that daylight, the last confirmed thread of Ashley Martinez's life runs directly to the passenger seat of a stolen gray Pontiac Bonneville that has never been found, driven by a man who has never said what happened next. She walked through a pool gate on a bright July afternoon and stepped into a silence that has now lasted more than 2 decades. The only man who might know the truth has never said a single word. If a crowded public pool couldn't keep one girl safe in broad daylight, wait until you hear how a man vanished from a rural Missouri road on a red motorcycle, leaving behind a trail that led investigators to a garage, a crime scene, and a pond, and still no body. Northern Boone County, Missouri, is the kind of landscape that looks peaceful from a car window and reveals its distances only when you try to move through it on foot. Rolling terrain, broken by gravel roads and tree lines, and the occasional farmstead set back far. Enough from the road that you could drive past it 100 times without knowing the details of what happens behind the tree line. The Missouri River runs along the county's northern edge, and the land between the river and the county seat of Columbia has the particular character of a place that is simultaneously close to a small city and genuinely remote in the intervals between populated points. Harrisburg, Missouri. It is one of those intervals, a small community in the northern part of the county where people know their neighbors, and the roads have names that local people know by heart, and outsiders have to look up twice. It is not a place where a distinctive vehicle goes unnoticed, because the traffic is light enough and the community small enough that anything unusual tends to register. A red 2009 Ducati motorcycle is a distinctive vehicle. It registers. It is the kind of machine that people remember seeing because it is not the kind of machine that blends into a rural Missouri backdrop. It is Italian. It is loud in the specific way that high-performance motorcycles are loud. It is visually arresting against a landscape of pickup trucks and farm equipment. Someone on a red Ducati on a gravel county road in northern Boone County should be traceable. The road should remember him. Charles Dwayne Bell Jr., known to everyone who knew him as Charlie, was 34 years old on September 15, 2011, when he was last seen by friends at the intersection of Dripping Springs Road and Red Rock Road outside Harrisburg. He was a white male with brown hair and blue eyes, and he carried himself with the kind of physical distinctiveness that the details of his appearance confirm: a goatee, piercings in both ears, and tattoos that included an eye on the back of his head and neck and a snake on his left bicep. He had the kind of appearance that people remember. He had a home on North Route E in Harrisburg, situated in the northern Boone County countryside near ponds and open farmland. He had, at the time of his disappearance, approximately $1.2 million in real and personal property, a detail that the investigation would later place at the center of its understanding of what happened to him, though that understanding arrived years after the fact, and without producing the evidence needed to fully prosecute what it suggested. The day he disappeared was supposed to be ordinary. Charlie Bell set out from Harrisburg on his red Ducati Missouri license plate, BP4GU, to run errands in Columbia, the county seat. roughly 15 miles south. His father, Charles Bell Sr., would later tell reporters that Charlie had been heading toward Columbia that afternoon. The route from Harrisburg toward Columbia, on the county roads of northern Boone County, passes through exactly the kind of terrain described above: gravel stretches and rural intersections and long intervals of open land between any two points where another person might be present to see what is happening. The errands were unremarkable. The destination was close. The ride, on a good day, would have taken 20 or 30 minutes. Charlie Bell was last seen at that intersection near Harrisburg, and then the road took him, and he did not arrive in Columbia, and he did not come home. Here's the critical detail about the timeline. Charlie Bell disappeared on September 15, 2011. He was not reported missing to the Boone County Sheriff's Office until September 18, 3 days later. Those 3 days are not as long as the 6-day gap in Branson Perry's case. But in an investigation where the trail was already cold by the time it was opened, 3 days is enough to let the most time-sensitive evidence age past its usefulness. An endangered missing person alert was issued after the report was filed, and it contained a specific and telling notation. The alert noted that Bell's family was concerned for his welfare due to recent changes in his behavior, and that he may be a danger to himself and others. That language, changes in behavior, danger to himself and others, placed a self-harm or mental health dimension into the official framing of the case from the earliest days of the search, and investigators had to account for that possibility alongside the others. What Charlie Bell was wearing when he left that morning is cataloged in the record with the specificity of a detail that matters. A red and black jacket, a red and black motorcycle helmet, size 34, Lucky jeans, brown slip-on, Dr. Martens loafers, square diamond earrings, and a black backpack, possibly a hooded sweatshirt, and a size 2 extra-large black t-shirt. The helmet and jacket matched the bike, red and black against red and black, a coherent visual package that should have been impossible to miss on a rural Missouri County road in daylight. A massive search was conducted in northern Boone County and the surrounding area. The red Ducati was not found on any roadside. Charlie Bell was not found on any roadside. There was no crash scene, no skid marks, no physical evidence of a mechanical failure or a collision. The motorcycle and the man simply ceased to be traceable at the intersection of Dripping Springs Road and Red Rock Road, and the search that followed found nothing that advanced the official understanding of where either of them went. This is where it stops being normal, because a missing person with a known destination on a distinctive vehicle in a sparsely populated county, with a 3-day head start on any formal investigation, is one kind of mystery. What happened next, nearly 3 years after Charlie Bell rode away from that intersection, transformed the case from a missing persons investigation into something with a much darker and more specific shape. In 2014, 2 Columbia residents were arrested in connection with the disappearance of Charles Dwayne Bell Jr. Their names are documented in court records and news reporting. Jennifer R. Freeman, 33 years old at the time of her arrest, and Patrick L. Curl, 43. Both were held on $300,000 bond. The charges filed against them were evidence tampering and hindering prosecution, not murder, not homicide, but the charges that attach to people who are accused of managing the aftermath of a crime rather than committing it. That distinction matters enormously to what the case became and what it has remained. Now this is where the case turns dark in the specific way that cases turn dark, when a cooperating witness provides an account that is detailed enough to be credible and incomplete enough to be maddeningly insufficient. An affidavit filed in connection with the arrests stated that a cooperating citizen came forward to say she had been present at a home when an associate of Charlie Bell's shot and killed him in the garage. The cooperating witness said she had helped dispose of evidence by cleaning the crime scene, using beach towels and cleaning supplies to remove what had been left behind. The location: the garage of a home in northern Boone County, consistent with the geography of Bell's known world. The disposal of the body: according to the account, a nearby pond. Boone County Sheriff's investigators stated publicly that they believed Charlie Bell's body had been dumped in a pond near his North Boone County home. Here's what doesn't make sense about the evidentiary position the case ended up in. The cooperating witness's account was specific enough to produce arrests and to reframe the case as a homicide investigation, but not specific enough or not supported by enough independent physical evidence to produce a murder charge against anyone. Patrick Curl pleaded guilty to tampering with physical evidence in a felony prosecution. That guilty plea is a documented fact. What it does not provide is a murder conviction, a named shooter, or a confirmed location of Charlie Bell's remains. The detective leading the investigation, identified in reporting as Detective O'Sullivan, declined publicly to say whether Freeman or Curl were involved in actually killing Bell, a careful statement that preserved the legal boundaries of what could be charged versus what was suspected. But here's the impossible gap that the case has lived inside ever since. Investigators believe they know, in rough outline, what happened to Charlie Bell on or around September 15, 2011. They believe he was killed. They believe his body was disposed of near his home. They have a guilty plea from someone who was present in the aftermath. They have searched the ponds in the area, and they have not found him. Boone County authorities have stated explicitly that they are looking to close a case involving a man who went missing in 2011 and is presumed dead, that they suspect foul play but have not found definitive evidence to prove that he is dead. In the language of law enforcement, presumed dead and proven dead are not the same thing, and the distance between those two states is exactly the distance that has kept Charlie Bell's case from reaching the resolution that his family has been waiting for across more than a decade. His mother's name is Doris Boyce. She has spoken publicly about what it means to wake up every day in a case that has a shape but not an ending to know, in the way that a mother knows things that outpace the formal evidentiary record, that her son is not coming home, while still not having the thing that would allow the legal process to close around what happened to him. Authorities have not found Charlie Bell's body. His family says they still don't have answers. Doris Boyce wakes up every day hoping and praying that her son will walk through her front door. That hope and that knowledge existing simultaneously in the same person is one of the specific cruelties of a case that is presumed solved and formally open at the same time. A red motorcycle that left an intersection in northern Boone County on a September afternoon and never arrived anywhere. A garage, a pond that has been searched. A guilty plea that stops short of telling the whole story. A mother at a door that does not open. The next one gave his fiancée a diamond ring at a payphone in Clinton on an April night in 1991 and heard the scream that ended everything. But before we get back to that trail, there are two more cases waiting in the Missouri record that the map has not yet touched. A highway corridor in the Bootheel and a cipher that the FBI cannot crack. Both of them are waiting, and neither of them is finished. There is a thread that runs through the Missouri cases covered in this file that is easy to miss when you are focused on the individual details of each disappearance, the specific payphone, the specific shed, the specific pool gate, the specific intersection. The thread is this. In case after case, the people who vanished left behind the things that people only leave behind when they do not intend to leave at all. Purses and cars and medications and motorcycles and personal belongings that represent the practical infrastructure of a life in progress. The leaving behind is almost always the first sign that something has gone wrong, because it represents a contradiction that cannot be resolved by any innocent explanation. You do not walk away from everything you need if you are choosing to walk away. But there is a second thread in this file, quieter and more unsettling, and it runs through the cases where the missing person was not alone when they vanished, where other people were present, where the disappearance happened in a context of visibility and proximity that should have made it impossible and happened anyway, and the visibility produced nothing that the investigation could use. That second thread connects to the case of Angela Hammond in Clinton, heard through a telephone receiver by the man who loved her. Witnessed in the sense that a scream is a form of witness, but witnessed without producing an identification or an arrest or a resolution across more than 30 years. It connects to Branson Perry in Skidmore, 2 men in the yard, the shed just yards away. Nobody saw anything. It connects to Ashley Martinez at Krug Pool, a crowd of people, a July afternoon, multiple witnesses who saw her get into the car, and the car has never been found. And it connects, in its own way, to the two cases that close this file, one from 1978 and one from 1979 where the geography of Missouri's roads and corridors becomes the dominant character in the story, and the people who vanished are defined partly by the specific landscapes that took them. Before returning to close those threads, it is worth pausing on the shape of the full Missouri map that this file has traced, because the geography is not incidental to these cases, it is structural. Springfield in the southwest, Skidmore in the northwest, Clinton in the west-central corridor, Spanish Lake and East St. Louis on the eastern border, West Alton in the river bottoms of St. Charles County, Jefferson City and Ashland in the central corridor, Kansas City in the west, Scott City in the Booth Heel, St. Joseph on the Missouri River in the northwest, Harrisburg in northern Boone County. 10 cases distributed across a state the size of a significant European country, in terrain that ranges from suburban residential streets to rural gravel roads, to interstate highway corridors, to river-bottom field roads. What they share is not geography. What they share is the gap, the moment where a person was present and then was not. And the space between those two states has never been satisfactorily explained. This is the part of the file where the cases that have not yet received their full treatment come back into focus. Because the structure of this documentary has moved through the cases in an order designed to build from the largest and most complex case at the opening to the cases that illustrate the specific varieties of impossibility that Missouri's landscape and institutional history produce. The Springfield 3 gave us 3 people in a cleaned house and a wiped tape. Branson Perry gave us jumper cables and a 6-day head start. Phoenix Colden gave us a 2-week impound delay and a state line crossed. Angela Hammond gave us a scream through a telephone and a truck nobody caught. Lisa Irwin gave us an empty crib and no intruder ever charged. Cheryl Scherer gave us a highway gas station and 45 years of open questions. Ricky McCormick gave us a field, a homicide, and 2 coded notes the FBI cannot read. Leanne Wilson gave us a witness on a dark highway and a car left in a parking lot miles from where she died. Ashley Martinez gave us a crowded pool and a man who has never said a word. Charlie Bell gave us a red motorcycle, a garage, and a pond that has been searched without result. Here's the critical detail about what these cases produce collectively, beyond their individual facts. They produce a portrait of institutional failure that is distributed across decades and jurisdictions and case types in a way that resists any single explanation. Some of the failures are about resources, small-town departments without the staffing to mount the kind of immediate, sustained response that the first hours of a missing persons case demand. Some are about evidence handling the Springfield house cleaned by well-meaning friends, the impound lot that held Phoenix Colden's car for 2 weeks without notification. Some are about classification. Ashley Martinez filed as an endangered runaway in a context where the facts around her departure resist that framing. Some are about geography, the interstate corridors and field roads and river-bottom lanes that provide access and anonymity to whoever used them, and deny both to investigators trying to reconstruct what happened. And some are about the simple, irreducible difficulty of proving what happened to a person when the person cannot be found, and the witnesses who were present have chosen silence or cannot be identified. Now this is where the file turns to its closing examination, because there are patterns in the Missouri cold case record that deserve to be named without being overstated. The highway corridor pattern is the most documented, the concentration of disappearances along Missouri's major interstate and state highway routes, particularly Interstate 55 through the Booth Heel, United States Route 63 through the Central Corridor, and the rural state routes that connect small communities to larger ones. Law enforcement and researchers who study predatory crime have identified highway access as a consistent factor in cases involving isolated victims at roadside locations. And the Missouri cases in this file that fit that profile: Cheryl Scherer on the Booth Heel Corridor, Leanne Wilson on United States Route 63, Angela Hammond on the roads outside Clinton, share that structural feature without sharing a confirmed perpetrator or any hard evidentiary link to each other. The clustering pattern is more speculative and requires more careful handling. The Western Missouri Cluster of 1991, Trudy Darby from Max Creek in January, Cheryl Ann Kenny from Nevada in February, Angela Hammond from Clinton in April, represents 3 disappearances within 3 months, within a roughly 90-mile radius of each other. all involving young women at roadside or public locations in rural western Missouri. The geographic and temporal proximity of those 3 cases has been noted by investigators and by researchers who study serial predatory crime. No hard evidence links them. No perpetrator has been identified who connects all 3. The cluster may represent a single actor moving through the region during that window, or it may represent the terrible coincidence that statistical distributions produce when you look at any bounded geography over any bounded time period and count the bad things that happened within it. Both of those explanations are possible. Neither has been confirmed. But here's what doesn't make sense about treating the 1991 cluster as pure coincidence, stated carefully. 3 similar cases in 3 months in a 90-mile rural corridor is not a number that investigators can responsibly ignore, and none of the 3 cases has been solved. And the absence of a resolution in all 3 simultaneously is the kind of pattern that keeps investigators returning to the possibility of connection, even when the evidence does not yet support confirming it. The possibility is documented as a line of inquiry. It is not documented as a conclusion. The 2011 cluster is different in character, but equally notable in its own way. Phoenix Colden disappeared in December 2011. Ashley Martinez in July 2004, Charlie Bell in September 2011, and Lisa Irwin in October 2011. 3 Missouri disappearances within a single calendar year, 2011, with no confirmed connections between them and no single investigative thread that links their circumstances. They are separate cases in separate jurisdictions with separate investigators and separate theories. And the fact that they occurred in the same year is almost certainly not significant in the way that the 1991 cluster may be significant. But the accumulation is worth noting as part of an honest accounting of what the Missouri cold case record looks like when you pull back far enough to see its shape. This is where it stops being a collection of individual tragedies and starts to look like something that has a structure, not a conspiracy, not a single actor, but a set of conditions that the state of Missouri created and sustained across decades. Rural geography that provides access and anonymity, highway corridors that connect vulnerable locations to escape routes, institutional gaps in reporting and response time that consistently cost investigations the hours and days they needed most, and a public record that is full of cases where someone knows something and has chosen not to say it. Robert Craig Cox, who told journalists he knew the Springfield 3 were dead and buried and then provided nothing actionable. The 2 men in Branson Perry's yard, who saw nothing. Christopher Matthias Hart, who has maintained total silence about Ashley Martinez for 2 decades. The man on the Highway 63 median, who the witness saw and who has never been identified. The person or persons who moved Leanne Wilson's car to a Jefferson City parking lot and walked away. Patrick Curl, who pleaded guilty to evidence tampering in Charlie Bell's case, and whose guilty plea stops exactly at the boundary of what happened in that garage. Here's the impossible gap that the Missouri cold case record produces when you look at all 10 of these cases together. Across 30-plus years and 10 separate jurisdictions and 10 separate investigations, the aggregate total of people who have been charged and convicted of the actual crime of killing or abducting the missing persons in this file is 0. Evidence tampering, hindering prosecution, but no murder convictions tied to these 10 cases. The knowledge of what happened, whatever portion of it exists in the minds of people who were present or involved, has not translated into the legal accountability that would close even one of these files completely. The Missouri River runs across the top of the state, and the Mississippi runs along its eastern edge. And between them, the land holds its secrets in the way that landscapes hold secrets when the distances are large enough and the roads are empty enough, and the people who know what happened have decided, for whatever reasons people make that decision, to keep knowing it quietly and alone. 10 cases, 10 open files, 10 families who have been waiting for answers across decades of Missouri seasons, through the particular cruelty of anniversaries and the particular exhaustion of hope that refuses to die even when every rational signal says it should. The map is traced, the routes are documented, the gaps are named. What fills them remains, in every one of these 10 cases, officially unknown. The cold case record does not close cleanly. That is the first thing that any honest examination of it has to acknowledge, because the expectation of closure, the belief that investigation and time and the accumulation of evidence will eventually produce the answer that makes a case make sense, is an expectation that these 10 Missouri files consistently refuse to satisfy. But there is a difference between a case that has no leads and a case that has leads without conclusions, and several of the files in this documentary sit in that second category. They have names, they have witnesses, they have partial accounts from people who were present in the aftermath of what happened. And they remain open not because nothing is known, but because what is known stops short of what is needed. That gap between knowing and proving is one of the specific cruelties of cold case investigation, and it runs through this file like a fault line. Return for a moment to Angela Hammond in Clinton, because her case has a development that arrived 30 years after the fact and deserves more careful examination than it received in the earlier treatment. The 2021 lead, the informant, who came forward with the mistaken identity theory, the suggestion that the man in the coveralls and the dark cap at that Jefferson Street parking lot was looking for a different Angela, a different young woman who also went by Angie and also lived in Clinton, is the kind of development that cold case investigators simultaneously value and distrust. They value it because any new information in a 30-year-old case represents a thread that was not previously available to pull. They distrust it because informant accounts that arrive decades after the fact carry the accumulated distortions of time and motive and the specific unreliability of memory that has had 30 years to reorganize itself around whatever the informant believes or wants to be true. The theory is documented. It has been investigated. It has not produced a charge, a name, or a resolution. Whether it is accurate, whether Angela Hammond was taken by mistake in place of someone else, which would mean that somewhere in Clinton in 1991, there was a woman who was the intended target and who has lived the subsequent 30 years without knowing how close she came to being the person Rob Schaefer heard. Scream is officially unknown and may remain so. What the 2021 development does, regardless of whether it proves accurate, is reopen the question of motive, in a case where motive has always been the darkest of the unknowns. Angela Hammond was not a public figure. She was not involved, as far as the public record shows, in anything that would have made her a specific target. She was a 20-year-old bank clerk and college student at a payphone on a Friday night, 4 months pregnant, checking in with her fiancé. If the mistaken identity theory is correct, then she was taken not because of who she was, but because of what her name sounded like to someone who meant harm to someone else, which is a different, and in some ways, more terrifying kind of randomness than the randomness of a particle. Predator selecting a victim of opportunity. It means the answer to why Angela Hammond specifically, of all the young women in Clinton that night, ends with a name that rhymes with hers. But here is the critical detail that the mistaken identity theory cannot resolve, regardless of whether it is accurate. It explains a possible motive, but does not identify a perpetrator. Even if investigators established beyond any doubt that the man in the truck was looking for a different Angela, they would still need to identify the man in the truck, and that identification has not been made in 33 years. The truck description, the outdoor scene rear window decal, the coveralls, the dark cap is as specific as the record gets, and it has attached itself to no one. The lead is open. The case is open. Rob Schaefer, who picked up a phone on an April night in 1991 and heard his fiancée scream into a receiver and then drove his car into a breakdown on the road behind a truck he could not catch. Rob Schaefer has been waiting for an answer for 33 years. The answer has not come. Now move back to Phoenix Colden, because her case also has investigative threads that the earlier treatment introduced without fully developing. The question of why Phoenix was in East St. Louis on the afternoon of December 18, 2011, is the central geographic mystery of her disappearance. The question that the 2-week impound delay made exponentially harder to answer, because by the time investigators could examine her vehicle and begin tracing the route that brought it to the 900 block of St. Clair Avenue, the trail from Spanish Lake to that address had aged past the point where the most time-sensitive forensic and witness evidence could be recovered. The investigation revealed that Phoenix had phone and relationship leads that her family had not been aware of. She had dropped her classes at UMSL without telling her parents. She had, in other words, a private life that existed alongside the life her family knew, and the contents of that private life are relevant to understanding where she was going on that Sunday afternoon and with whom she was in contact. The specifics of those leads, the names, the numbers, the nature of the relationships that investigators pursued are not fully detailed in the available public record in a way that allows them to be reported here with confidence, and this account will not construct specifics that the record does not support. What is documented is that the leads existed and were pursued and did not produce a confirmed account of what happened between Spanish Lake and East St. Louis on the afternoon she disappeared. The voluntary disappearance theory, the possibility that Phoenix Colden chose to leave her life, drove herself to East St. Louis, left the car, and has been living somewhere under circumstances she has not chosen to disclose, has never been definitively ruled out, and has never been definitively confirmed. It is the theory that fits most easily with the fact that the car was not running and the door was not open, and there was no physical evidence at the scene of a struggle or a forced removal. It is also the theory that her family has consistently and vocally resisted, arguing that a young woman with Phoenix's specific history and personality would not have maintained silence from her family for more than a decade under any voluntary circumstances. Both positions are understandable. Neither is provable from the current public record. Phoenix Colden's case is officially classified as a missing person. She has not been found. She has not made contact. The question of whether she left voluntarily or was taken remains open. Return also to the Springfield 3, because the Robert Craig Cox dimension of that case has a specific texture that is worth examining in the context of what has been documented across this file. Cox's 1997 statements to journalists, his claim that he knew the women were dead and buried, his refusal to provide any actionable specifics to investigators represent a particular category of information that cold case files sometimes accumulate. The claim that is specific enough to be taken seriously and vague enough to be impossible to verify or act upon. Cox has never been charged in connection with the Springfield 3. The physical evidence that would be needed to connect him to what happened on Delmar Street in June of 1992 has not been produced. His statements are in the record as documented public claims made by a man already convicted of murder in another jurisdiction. What they mean for the case, whether they represent genuine knowledge, a desire for notoriety, a calculated performance, or something else entirely, is unknown. What is known is that Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, and Stacy McCall have never been found. In more than 30 years, no remains have been recovered. No burial site has been identified. No physical evidence has been produced that definitively establishes what happened to them after the early hours of June 7, 1992. The case is the longest-running major missing persons investigation in Springfield's history, and it has consumed the investigative resources of multiple agencies and the personal resources of families who have been searching and waiting and hoping across 3 decades of Missouri seasons. The broken porch light globe is still the most tangible physical anomaly the scene produced, and it has never been explained. Here is what does not make sense about where the Springfield 3 case stands after 32 years. The scale of the disappearance, 3 people, simultaneously, from a suburban home, is the kind of event that generates the most abundant evidence. Because 3 people living together leave 3 times the physical trace of 1 person, and a home that was occupied until the early hours of the morning should have been full of the accumulated forensic texture of recent habitation. The cleaning that happened before investigators arrived did not erase everything. Law enforcement examined the house. The house was processed, and still nothing emerged that pointed toward a specific perpetrator or a specific account of what happened. That absence, the absence not just of an answer, but of the kind of physical evidence that usually produces one, is the thing that has kept the Springfield 3 case in the realm of genuine mystery rather than unsolved, but understood. Now this is where the file turns toward its final accounting, because there are 2 categories of open question that these 10 cases produce, and they are not the same category. The first is the question of what happened, the factual reconstruction of events that would allow investigators to say with confidence, this person, in this place, at this time, did this to these people. And here is the evidence that establishes each of those elements. In every one of the 10 cases in this file, that question is at least partially unanswered. In most of them, it is substantially unanswered. In some of them, the Springfield Three, Cheryl Scherer, Angela Hammond, Ricky McCormick, it is almost entirely unanswered in the public record. The second question is different and harder, and is not really a question that investigations are designed to answer. What does it mean that these cases exist? That these people vanished? That the state of Missouri has produced this many open files across this many decades and this much geography? That question does not have a factual answer. It has only the accumulation of individual human losses that sit behind every case number and every missing persons listing and every family that has been waiting longer than any family should have to wait. The map is almost fully traced. 2 cases remain in their final treatment, and the closing of this file will return to the places where this documentary began. The Missouri roads and corridors and small town streets where 10 people were present and then were not, and the silence that has occupied the space where they used to be. The things that cold cases leave behind are rarely the things that close them. They leave behind photographs, the specific frozen quality of a face captured in a moment that preceded everything that came after. A face that stays the same age while the people who loved it get older, and the investigators assigned to it rotate through retirements and reassignments, and the particular institutional exhaustion of carrying an unanswered question across decades. They leave behind physical evidence in property rooms and evidence lockers, fibers, personal effects, the cataloged inventory of a life interrupted mid-sentence. They leave behind case files that grow thicker with each new lead and each new dead end, the paper accumulation of everything that was tried and everything that failed and everything that arrived too late to matter. And they leave behind the people who are still waiting, the mothers and fathers and fiancés and siblings and friends who have built their lives around a question that has not been answered and may not be answered in their lifetimes, and who have learned, through the specific education that this kind of loss provides, to carry that question without being destroyed by it, even when the carrying is the hardest thing they have ever done. Doris Boyce carries it. She is Charlie Bell's mother, and she has said publicly that she wakes up every morning hoping her son will walk through her front door. That hope is not naivete. It is the specific form of endurance that families of the missing develop when the alternative accepting a finality that has not been legally or forensically established feels like a betrayal of the person who has not been found. The Boone County Sheriff's Office has stated that they believe Charlie Bell is dead, that they believe foul play was involved, that they have searched the ponds near his North Boone County home. They have a cooperating witness account that describes a shooting in a garage and a body disposed of in water. They have a guilty plea from Patrick Curl for evidence tampering, and they do not have Charlie Bell. His body has not been found. The case cannot close in the way that cases close when the physical evidence establishes beyond legal doubt what happened to the person at the center of it. That gap between what investigators believe and what they can prove, between a presumed death and a confirmed one, between a guilty plea for evidence tampering and a conviction for the underlying crime, is one of the most specific cruelties that the legal system produces in cases where the body has not been recovered and the principal witness, silence. Curl's guilty plea to tampering with physical evidence in a felony prosecution is a documented fact. What it does not establish, in the formal legal sense, is who shot Charlie Bell, whether Curl or Freeman were present when it happened, or whether the account provided by the cooperating witness is complete and accurate in all its particulars. Detective O'Sullivan declined to say whether Freeman or Curl were involved in killing Bell. That carefully bounded statement is the limit of what the investigation has been able to formally establish, and it has been the limit for more than a decade. Jennifer Freeman, the second person arrested in 2014, was also held on $300,000 bond on charges of evidence tampering and hindering prosecution. The public record of what subsequently happened to her charges and what she has disclosed, if anything, to investigators is not fully detailed in the available sourcing, and this account will not construct specifics beyond what is documented. What is documented is that 2 people were arrested. One pleaded guilty to evidence tampering, and the question of who pulled the trigger in that garage has not been formally answered in any court proceeding available in the public record. The red Ducati has not been found. Missouri license plate BP4GU. A machine that distinctive Italian, red and black. The specific sound signature of a high-performance motorcycle on a rural Boone County road should have left a trace somewhere between the intersection of Dripping Springs Road and Red Rock Road and whatever garage or field or drainage ditch it was taken to. It has not. The bike and the man it was carrying vanished from northern Boone County in the same motion, and the search that followed found neither. If the cooperating witness account is accurate, then the Ducati's location is known to the people who were present that day and has been kept from investigators through the same sustained silence that has kept the body from being found. If the account is incomplete or inaccurate in some particular, then there may be a version of events that the investigation has not yet reached, in which the bike and the man diverged at some point that the record has not mapped. A vehicle as visually and acoustically distinctive as a red Ducati on a rural Missouri County road is the kind of thing that should have generated a sighting, a reported sound, a neighbor's offhand memory of a motorcycle that came down the road and did not come back. The silence around it is its own kind of answer, and like most of the answers in this file, it raises more questions than it closes. Here's the critical detail about what the property dimension of Charlie Bell's case adds to its texture. At the time of his disappearance, Bell had approximately $1.2 million in real and personal property. That figure, documented in the reporting around the case, does not appear in the record as the established motive for what happened to him. It appears as a fact about his circumstances at the time he vanished, and investigators have examined the question of whether his assets played a role in whatever transpired in that garage on or around September 15, 2011. Whether motive connected to property can be established at a level that would support a charge is a question that remains unanswered in the public record. It is documented as a dimension investigators were aware of. It is not documented as a proven element of a criminal case. What it does, in the context of this file, is add a specific weight to the question of why. Why Charlie Bell specifically? Why that afternoon? Why a stolen motorcycle and a cleaned garage and a searched pond that has not yielded what investigators believe it contains? The why, in this case, has a shape, even if it does not yet have a name attached to it. What is documented, finally and simply, about Charles Dwayne Bell Jr.? He was 34 years old. He rode a red Ducati. He had a tattoo of an eye on the back of his head and neck and a snake on his left bicep. He was heading toward Columbia to run errands on a September afternoon, and he has not been seen since the intersection of Dripping Springs Road and Red Rock Road in northern Boone County, Missouri. His mother is still waiting. The case is still open. The pond has been searched and has not given him back. Now return to Ricky McCormick, because the coded notes dimension of his case has a final layer that the earlier treatment introduced and did not fully resolve, which is the question of what the notes being uncracked means for the investigation rather than for the cryptographic puzzle. Law enforcement cold case files contain, occasionally, a piece of evidence that is simultaneously the most concrete thing in the file and the most completely inaccessible. A fingerprint from an unknown person, a fiber that matches no known source, a voicemail from a number that was deactivated before it could be traced. Ricky McCormick's coded notes occupy that position in his file. They are physical objects. They exist in evidence. They were written by his hand, and they cannot be read by anyone currently alive who has attempted to read them, including the FBI's own cryptanalysis unit. The public appeal the FBI made in 2011, releasing images of the notes and asking amateur cryptographers and puzzle enthusiasts to submit proposed solutions, generated genuine engagement from the code-breaking community. People with serious analytical skills applied serious effort to the problem. Proposed solutions were submitted and examined. None has been confirmed as correct. The notes remain in the category that FBI analysts placed them in when they made the appeal, a personal encoding system that McCormick had apparently used for years, meaning the cipher was not a standard one-time encryption, but a habitual personal shorthand that he used regularly, and that no one outside his immediate circle of communication, if such a circle existed, could read without. A key that has not been found. That distinction matters. A one-time cipher is hard to break because the key was used once and discarded. A habitual personal system is hard to break because the key lives in the habits and associations of a specific human mind, and that mine belongs to a man who has been dead since 1999. Here's what doesn't make sense about Ricky McCormick's presence in that West Alton field. When you consider it against the backdrop of his daily life, he did not drive. He was managing ongoing health problems. And West Alton is not a location that a person without a vehicle and without a connection to that specific area reaches by accident or by the ordinary drift of daily movement. Someone brought him there, or someone directed him there, or he went there for a reason that connected to something in his life that has not been fully mapped by the investigation. The notes in his pockets may or may not speak to that reason. They may record a transaction, a name, a location, a threat, a message, or nothing that is relevant to his death. They may be a record of something mundane encoded in a system he used for reasons of personal habit rather than concealment. The FBI's position is that cracking the notes could advance the investigation. That position implies the Bureau believes the notes are meaningful rather than incidental, but the basis for that belief, beyond the general principle that evidence found on a homicide victim is relevant until demonstrated otherwise, is not detailed in the public statements around the case. What is detailed is that the notes exist, that they have resisted every systematic attempt to read them, and that the man who wrote them was found in a field he had no documented means of reaching, dead of causes a jury has never been asked to assign to anyone. 25 years. 2 scraps of paper. 1 field in St. Charles County that Ricky McCormick had no documented means of reaching. A homicide that has never been charged. The notes sit in the FBI's evidence archive as one of the agency's publicly acknowledged unsolved cryptographic challenges, which is a distinction that would be remarkable in any other context, and is, in the context of a 41-year-old man found dead in a Missouri cornfield, simply one more layer of an impossibility that has accumulated without resolving. His family has also waited. His case number sits in the St. Charles County cold case record alongside the cipher, and neither the case nor the cipher has moved toward resolution in the years since the FBI made its public appeal. The 2 mysteries are locked together, the geographical impossibility of how he reached the field, and the linguistic impossibility of what the notes say, and until one of them breaks open, the other has nowhere to go. This is where the file turns toward its final image, not a single image, but the composite one that these 10 cases produce when they are held together in the same frame. A Springfield porch light globe broken on the boards below the fixture. A set of jumper cables outside a shed door that was empty 2 weeks before. A black Blazer stopped in a traffic lane in East St. Louis. A payphone receiver dangling in a Clinton parking lot. An empty crib in a Kansas City home at dawn. A roadside pump in the Scott City booth heel. 2 coded notes in a dead man's pocket. Hazard lights blinking on the median of United States 63. A crowded pool gate through which one person walked and did not return. A red motorcycle at a Boone County intersection, turning onto a road that kept its name and lost its rider. 10 images, 10 open files, 10 families. Now this is where the case turns to its final accounting, the closing frame of a documentary that has traced a map across one American state and found at every point on that map the same thing. A place where someone was, and then a silence where they used to be. The final part of this file will hold that silence long enough to do it justice, and then it will name what these cases ask of the people who inherit them, the investigators, the families, the public that keeps looking, and the record that keeps waiting for someone to fill the gaps that 10 Missouri disappearances have left open across more than 4 decades of American time. The silence is almost the whole story, but not quite. There is one more part. There is a specific weight that a cold case carries that is different from the weight of other kinds of unresolved things. An unsolved mathematical problem sits in abstraction, patient and indifferent, waiting for the mind that will finally close it. An unfinished building stands in concrete incompletion, visible to everyone who passes it, accumulating weather and time in ways that are obvious and measurable. But an unsolved disappearance carries the weight of a person, a specific human being, with a specific face, and a specific set of habits, and a specific set of people who loved them. And that weight does not diminish with time, the way that other kinds of unresolved things diminish. It compounds. Every year that passes without an answer is another year added to the duration of the not knowing. And the not knowing is its own form of ongoing injury to the people who carry it. distinct from grief, in the way that a wound that cannot be treated is distinct from one that can. Grief has a shape. It has a direction. It moves, slowly and painfully, toward something that resembles accommodation, if not acceptance. The not knowing of a missing person case does not move in that direction. It stays open. It stays present. It wakes up in the morning alongside the people it belongs to and does not go away. Doris Boyce wakes up every day hoping her son will walk through her front door. That sentence has appeared in this file before, and it appears again here at the close because it is the most honest and concentrated expression of what these 10 cases cost the people at their center. Charlie Bell's mother is not a symbol. She is a woman who had a son and does not know where he is, and has been told by law enforcement that they believe he is dead and has not been given the thing, the physical confirmation, the legal resolution, the moment of formal acknowledgement that closes the official question that would allow her to grieve him in the way that a mother is supposed to be able to grieve a child. She is living inside the gap between presumed and proven, which is one of the specific geographic territories that cold cases create, and that no map acknowledges because it exists only in the lives of the people who are forced to inhabit it. Rob Schaefer heard his fiancée scream into a telephone receiver on an April night in 1991 in Clinton, Missouri, and has been living with that sound for 33 years. That sound is the last thing the public record tells us he heard from Angela Hammond, not her voice in conversation, not her laugh, not the ordinary sound of a person who is present and safe, and on the other end of a line, a scream. And then the line doing what lines do when the person holding the receiver is no longer there to hold it. 33 years is a long time to carry a sound. Rob Schaefer has carried it. The investigation has not taken it away. Tammy Mack dropped her daughter off at a pool gate at noon on a July afternoon in St. Joseph and watched Ashley walk through it and has not seen her since. That walk, the ordinary, unremarkable motion of a 15-year-old girl entering a public pool on a summer day, is the last confirmed image her mother has of her. Everything after it is inference and witness account and theory and the sustained 20-year silence of a man who was with Ashley and has chosen to say nothing about what happened to her. The pool gate is still there. The gate does not remember who walked through it. But the families of the missing remember everything, and the remembering does not stop because the answer has not come. Here is the critical detail about what these 10 cases collectively demand of the people who encounter them: investigators, journalists, documentary makers, viewers, the broader public that keeps cold cases alive by continuing to pay attention to them. They demand honesty about what is known and what is not. That demand sounds simple and is not. The pressure in any case file to resolve the narrative, to find the detail that closes the gap, to identify the suspect, to produce the ending that the structure of a story seems to require, is real and constant and dangerous in exactly the proportion to which it is indulged. This file has tried, across 11 parts and more than 20,000 words, to resist that pressure, to say unknown when the record says unknown, to label theory as theory and disputed detail as disputed, to keep the human beings at the center of these cases in full view as people rather than as narrative functions. Whether it has succeeded in that effort is a question the record itself can answer. Every fact in this file is sourced to documented public record, and every uncertainty is named as such. And every gap is left open because the gaps are open, and closing them with invention would be a second disappearance of the people who are already missing. What does the Missouri cold case record look like when you step back far enough to see all 10 of these files simultaneously? It looks like a state that has failed, in 10 specific and documented instances, to bring the institutional resources of law enforcement to bear on the problem of missing people in ways that produced resolution. Some of those failures are systemic: the reporting delays that cost Branson Perry's case and Charlie Bell's case the critical early hours, the impound notification gap that cost Phoenix Colden's case 2 weeks of investigative lead time, the evidence contamination that cost the Springfield 3 case whatever the House could have told a forensic examiner before 20 people moved through it with good intentions and cleaning supplies. Some of those failures are resource-based, small departments in rural counties without the staffing to mount sustained searches on the scale that missing persons cases require, without the forensic infrastructure to process evidence quickly. Without the interagency communication systems that would have told East St. Louis authorities in December 2011 that the black blazer they had impounded belonged to a young woman whose family was looking for her on the other side of the Mississippi River. And some of those failures are simply the failures that happen when someone who knows what happened has decided not to say so, and the investigation cannot compel them to speak, and the silence holds. Now this is where the file names what the public record asks of anyone who encounters it in good faith. Cold cases stay cold for reasons that are not always the same reason, and they warm occasionally, unpredictably, after years or decades, for reasons that are equally varied. A witness who was afraid and is no longer afraid. A technology that did not exist when the crime occurred and now can extract information from evidence that seemed exhausted. A family member of a perpetrator who has decided that loyalty has a limit, and that limit is a specific human being whose absence has gone unanswered long enough. A tip called into a hotline by someone who has been carrying a piece of information for years and has finally decided that the weight of it is greater than whatever was keeping them silent. The Springfield 3 case has been cold for 32 years. Cheryl Scherer's case has been cold for 45. Leanne Wilson's case has been cold for 46. And yet every one of them has a tip line, a case number, an investigator who is technically assigned to it, a family member who is still making calls and still hoping that this year will be the year that something changes. But here is what does not make sense about accepting that these cases will remain permanently closed. The information that would resolve most of them almost certainly exists. It exists in the memory of someone who was present or proximate to what happened. It exists in the physical record, the pond that has not given up Charlie Bell, the field road that Ricky McCormick somehow reached without a vehicle, the truck with the outdoor scene rear window decal that drove out of Clinton on an April night and has never been publicly identified. It exists in the 2 handwritten notes in a dead man's pockets that the FBI cannot read, which means that somewhere, possibly, there is a person alive today who knew Ricky McCormick well enough to understand his personal cipher and who has not come forward. The information is not gone. It is held by people, by physical evidence, by the specific silence that surrounds these cases and has surrounded them for years. The question is not whether the information exists. The question is whether it will ever be released. Here is the impossible gap that this file ends with, because every honest accounting of cold cases ends here. The gap between what happened and what is known is maintained, in most cases, by human choice. Someone chose to clean the Springfield house before investigators arrived. Someone chose not to report Branson Perry missing for 6 days. Someone chose to impound Phoenix Colden's car without notifying her family for 2 weeks. Christopher Matthias Hart has chosen, across 20 years of investigation and questioning, not to say what happened to Ashley Martinez. Patrick Curl chose to help clean a garage in northern Boone County and plead guilty to evidence tampering and stop there. The man on the Highway 63 median chose whatever he chose after the witness drove past him. The man with the rear window decal chose to drive away from a Clinton parking lot and has apparently never chosen to speak about it to anyone who has connected that choice to a public record. These are human choices, made by human beings, and they have been maintained across years and decades by whatever combination of fear and self-interest and moral compartmentalization allows a person to know what happened to another person and continue to live alongside that knowledge without surrendering it. This is where it stops being normal in the broadest possible sense, because the social contract that makes ordinary life possible depends on a baseline assumption that people who know things relevant to the disappearance or death of other people will, eventually, say so. That assumption is violated in these 10 cases. It has been violated for years, and the cost of that violation is carried not by the people who made the choice to be silent, but by the families who are still waiting, and by the missing persons themselves, who are owed an accounting that has not been provided. The Missouri map is fully traced now. Springfield, Skidmore, Spanish Lake, Clinton, Kansas City, Scott City, West Alton, Jefferson City, St. Joseph, Harrisburg. 10 points on a map of one American state, each one marking the place where someone was present and then was not. Each one connected to a file that is still open and a family that is still waiting and a question that has not been answered. The map does not tell you what happened at each of those points. It only tells you that something did. The details are in the case files, the evidence lockers, the memories of people who have not yet spoken, and the silence that Missouri has been keeping across more than 4 decades of disappearances that deserve better than silence. Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, Stacy McCall, Branson Perry, Phoenix Colden, Angela Hammond, Lisa Irwin, Cheryl Scherer, Ricky McCormick, Leanne Wilson, Ashley Martinez, Charles Dwayne Bell Jr. 12 people across 10 cases, 12 names the record holds, 12 open questions that Missouri has not closed. If you know anything about any of these cases, the tip lines are active and the cases are open and the families are still waiting. If this file moved you, subscribe, because there are more maps to trace and more names the record is still holding and more silences that deserve to be broken. 10 Missouri towns. None of them came home. The door is still open.